In the farthest reaches of the galaxy, far beyond the attention of most advanced civilizations, a small alien race struggled to survive. The Urian, a peaceful species known for their wisdom and ancient culture, had once been a thriving people. Their planet was lush, their cities grand, and their influence stretched across the stars. But now, the Urian were nothing more than a forgotten memory, abandoned by the greater galactic powers. Their planet, once a hub of prosperity, was now a barren wasteland, the victims of neglect and war. The Urian had no military strength left, no allies, and no resources to fight back against the invaders who ravaged their world. For years, the Urian had suffered in silence, their cries ignored by those in power. The great empires of the galaxy, focused only on their own expansion and power struggles, had long turned their backs on the Urian. But now, with their species on the brink of extinction, the Urian leaders made a desperate decision. They sent out a final distress signal, a call for help into the vastness of space, hoping against hope that someone, anyone, would answer. The message was simple: please, we are the Urian. We are dying. If anyone can hear us, we need help. Our world is falling apart. We ask for a chance to survive. The Urian didn't expect a response. They knew they were insignificant in the grand scheme of the galaxy. To most, they were nothing more than a footnote in history, but their desperation left them with no choice. They had to try. Meanwhile, far away on the human frontier, a ship drifted through the stars. The stalwart Horizon, a vessel used for exploration and peacekeeping missions, was on its routine journey when something unusual caught the attention of its crew. The ship's communication officer, Lieutenant Derek Williams, had been scanning deep space frequencies when he noticed a faint, garbled signal. "Captain, you'll want to hear this," Derek called, his voice full of intrigue. Captain Elena Marsden, the leader of the stalwart Horizon, approached the communication console. She had seen countless messages in her career, many of them unintelligible, but there was something different about this one. The signal was weak, distorted, but it was there. It was a distress call, and it was pleading for help. Elena listened carefully as the words echoed in the quiet room. She recognized the language as one from a race she had never encountered before, but the message was clear. A race was in danger, a peaceful people fighting for their survival. She had heard of the Urian before, but only in passing. They were an ancient species, known for their wisdom and creativity, but also for their lack of military power. They had never been a threat, and as a result, they had been ignored by the galactic powers who controlled the larger parts of space. "Are we going to respond?" Derek asked, his tone unsure. He knew the risks of helping such a race. The galaxy was full of powerful enemies, and intervening in another species' struggles often led to trouble. Elena took a deep breath. She had never been one to shy away from difficult decisions. Her crew respected her for her ability to lead with both courage and compassion. After a long pause, she nodded. "We're going," Elena said firmly. "We can't just ignore them. If they've sent a distress call, they need our help. The galaxy has turned its back on them, but we won't." Set a course for the Urian homeworld. The crew, though nervous, knew their captain well enough to trust her judgment. They had seen her face down impossible odds before and come out victorious. This would be no different. As the stalwart Horizon adjusted its course toward the Urian homeworld, the crew began to prepare. They didn't know what they would find when they arrived. Would the Urian still be alive? Would they be able to offer any kind of assistance to such a fragile species? And most importantly, what would they face when they arrived? Elena stood on the bridge, staring out at the stars. She knew the journey ahead would not be easy. There was a great deal of risk involved in helping a race as forgotten and abandoned as the Urian. But deep down, she felt it was the right thing to do. Humanity had always been a species that had fought for the underdog, that had stood up when others turned away. This was no different. The crew of the stalwart Horizon set their course, and for the first time in a long while, They felt a sense of purpose. They weren't just explorers. They weren't just following orders. They were about to make a difference. They were about to stand up for a species that no one else would. As the ship moved deeper into space, Alina couldn't shake the feeling that this mission would change everything. The fate of the Urian, and perhaps the future of humanity's place in the galaxy, depended on the choices they made in the days to come. The call had been made. Now, it was up to humanity to answer. The stalwart Horizon sped through the blackness of space, its engines humming as it made its way to the Urian homeworld. The journey was long, but the crew remained focused. They didn't know what to expect, but they knew the task at hand was important. The decision to help the Urian, a race once thought to be forgotten by the galaxy, weighed heavily on Captain Alina Marsden's shoulders. Finally, after days of travel, the ship entered the orbit of the Urian planet. What they saw wasn't what they had imagined. From a distance, the planet still looked beautiful, but as they approached, the devastation became clearer. The planet's once lush green continents had turned to dust, and its great oceans were now reduced to shallow, murky pools. Entire cities that had once been symbols of the Urians' advanced culture lay in ruins, swallowed by time and neglect. Alina stood on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the planet below. The sadness in her heart was palpable, but she pushed it aside. There was work to be done. "We're here," Alina said, her voice calm but determined. "Prepare to make contact with the Urian leaders. We need to find out exactly what they need from us." Lieutenant Derek Williams, the communication officer, quickly began working to establish a connection. The silence of space was broken only by the soft beeping of the console as he sent out a signal to the planet's surface. After a few moments, a flickering image appeared on the screen, a face, alien and delicate, but full of wisdom. The figure on the screen was an older Urian, with deep green eyes and silver-tinted skin. Her name, as the message had indicated, was Lyris. She was an elder of the Urian people, and her appearance spoke volumes about the hardships her species had endured. Her eyes were tired, her voice soft but urgent. "Greetings, travelers," Lyris said in a language that, though alien, had a familiar cadence. "I did not expect anyone to come. For so long, the galaxy has turned its back on us. We are alone." Alina's heart sank. She had heard of the Urian, but seeing one in person, seeing the weight of their struggle in their eyes, was something different. "We received your distress signal," Alina said, trying to keep her voice steady. "We're here to help. What do you need?" Lyris paused, as if weighing her words carefully before speaking again. "We need everything," she said. "Our people are scattered. Our cities in ruins. We need food, shelter, medicine. But more than that, we need protection. Our world is under constant attack from scavengers and raiders. The galaxy may have forgotten us, but our enemies have not." Alina glanced around at her crew. They had no military force, no large weapons, just a handful of ships and limited resources. They were explorers, scientists, not soldiers. But Alina's resolve was unwavering. "We can help with that," she said firmly. "We'll provide whatever we can, but we need to know where your people are. How many are left?" Lyris's gaze dropped as if the weight of that question was too much to bear. "Fewer than you would think. Our population has dwindled to the thousands. Most of our people are scattered in small, hidden settlements, trying to survive. We've lost contact with many of them." Alina's heart tightened. She knew the road ahead would not be easy. The Urian had no military to speak of, no advanced technology to defend themselves, and little in the way of resources to help rebuild their world. The humans were not in a position to offer miracles, but they could make a difference, however small. "We will begin by making contact with your people," Alina said, determination setting in. "We'll bring supplies, help with rebuilding, and we'll make sure no one else tries to harm you. You are not alone anymore." Lyris looked at her, her expression a mixture of hope and disbelief. "You would do that? For us? After all this time?" Elena nodded. Yes, we'll help you rebuild, protect your people, and bring back what was lost. Humanity doesn't turn its back on those in need. The Urian elder's eyes welled with tears, but she smiled, a small, fragile smile that held the weight of centuries of suffering. Thank you. We have not heard such words in so long. Elena turned to her crew. Prepare a team. We'll head down to the surface and meet with the Urian survivors. It's time to start rebuilding. As the crew prepared for the mission, Elena felt a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. She had always believed that humanity could make a difference, that even in the vastness of space, the actions of individuals could change the course of history. But standing on the edge of a planet that had been forgotten by the galaxy, she felt the weight of their responsibility. They weren't just here to offer help. They were here to offer hope. As the stalwart horizon descended toward the surface of the Urian planet, Elena couldn't help but wonder what they would find. Would the Urian survivors be willing to trust them? Would they accept the help humanity had to offer? And would they be able to defend their world from the threats that loomed on the horizon? One thing was certain: humanity had answered the call. And now, they would do everything in their power to make sure the Urian would never be forgotten again. The stalwart horizon touched down on the surface of the Urian homeworld, its landing gear making a soft thud against the cracked earth. The planet's once thriving cities were now nothing more than abandoned ruins, and the atmosphere was thick with the dust of a dying world. Captain Elena Marsden, along with her team, stepped off the ship into the dry, harsh environment. The air was thin, and the sun, though distant, seemed to scorch everything it touched. The crew adjusted their helmets and environmental suits, preparing for the difficult task ahead. Elena's eyes scanned the landscape. There was no sign of the Urian's grand cities, only broken remnants of a once great civilization. Yet in the distance, she saw a small group of figures moving slowly toward them. It was a relief to see that some of the Urian survivors were still alive, still holding on to whatever hope they could find. Lyris, the elder who had contacted them, stood at the front of the group, her silver-tinted skin glowing faintly in the sunlight. She looked older in person, wearied by years of hardship, but there was a fire in her eyes, a determination to protect her people, no matter what. "You came," Lyris said, her voice soft but filled with emotion. "You actually came. We thought we were beyond help." Elena smiled, though she could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her. "You're not alone anymore. We'll help you rebuild. We'll protect you." Lyris nodded, but there was sadness in her eyes. "There is so much to be done. We've lost so much already, Captain. The planet is dying. Our cities are in ruins. We have no resources left." Elena's heart ached at the truth of Lyris's words, but she refused to show weakness. "We'll start small. First, we'll make sure your people are safe. We've brought food, medical supplies, and shelter materials. We'll also start working on restoring your power and water systems." Lyris seemed to brighten a little. "That is more than we ever expected. Thank you." As the team began unloading supplies from the stalwart horizon, Elena gathered her crew for a quick briefing. "We have to work fast," she said. "The Urian are vulnerable. We don't know what enemies are still out there, so we need to establish a perimeter and make sure we're secure." Lieutenant Derek Williams stepped forward. "I've already mapped out the region. We'll set up defenses around this settlement first, and then move to help other groups of survivors." "Good," Elena replied. "Let's do it. Keep your eyes open, everyone. We don't know what we're up against." As they worked, the small group of Urian survivors began to gather around the landing site, their eyes filled with cautious hope. They were a peaceful people, not accustomed to defending themselves from threats. They had relied on diplomacy and trade, not weapons. But now, that was all changing. They were learning that survival came at a price, and that price might be more than they had ever imagined. Throughout the day, the crew worked tirelessly. They set up shelter for the survivors, provided medical care for the sick and injured, and began the difficult task of repairing the planet's broken infrastructure. Alina's mind was focused, her every thought centered on the mission. But even as she worked, she couldn't ignore the quiet realization that this wasn't just a rescue mission. It was the beginning of something much bigger. Humanity wasn't just saving the Urian. They were becoming part of their future. By the end of the day, the survivors were more organized, the area more secure, and the stalwart Horizon crew was exhausted. Alina stood near the edge of the settlement, watching as the last of the supplies were unloaded. The sky was beginning to darken, and the stars began to shine through the thinning atmosphere. It was a beautiful sight, despite everything the planet had suffered. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't seem as bleak. Lyris approached Alina, her silver eyes glowing in the fading light. "I never thought I would see this day," she said. "I had lost all hope. But now, with your help, we can start again." Alina smiled. "We're just getting started, Lyris. There's still a long way to go, but we'll get there. Together." Lyris's eyes softened. "You've brought more than just supplies, Captain. You've brought us hope. That is something we haven't had in a long time." The weight of those words lingered in Alina's mind. Hope. That was something the Urian had lost, but it was also something that humanity had always carried. It was what drove them to explore the stars, to fight for the helpless, and to protect the innocent. And now it was something they could share with the Urian. As night fell, the camp settled into a fragile peace. The survivors gathered around a small fire, sharing stories and food, while the stalwart Horizon crew kept watch. There was a sense of unity that Alina had not expected, an unspoken bond between two species who had been brought together by chance, but whose fates were now intertwined. Alina stood guard, looking out at the quiet horizon. She knew the challenges were far from over. The Urians still faced danger from raiders, from the harsh environment, and from their own doubts. But the first step had been taken, and in that moment, Alina knew that no matter what came next, humanity would stand by the Urian until they were safe once again. And so, under the stars of a dying world, the first chapter of a new alliance was written. An alliance built on hope, determination, and the promise that no one would ever be left behind. Days passed, and the camp was slowly beginning to look like a proper settlement. The crew of the stalwart Horizon had worked relentlessly to bring life back to the desolate planet, but the road ahead remained difficult. Power grids were still unstable, and many of the Urian survivors were suffering from malnutrition and injuries that needed long-term care. Despite these challenges, a sense of hope had begun to spread through the small community. The Urian were starting to believe that they might have a future after all. But that hope was soon threatened. It was late one evening when the warning alarms blared throughout the camp, snapping everyone to attention. Alina, who had been reviewing the progress of the medical supplies, rushed to the communications deck. Lieutenant Derek Williams was already there, his face grim as he monitored the incoming signals. "What's happening?" Alina asked, her voice tight with concern. "There's a ship approaching," Derek replied, his fingers flying over the control panel. "It's not one of ours, and it's moving fast. It's heading straight for the settlement." "Are they hostile?" Alina's mind raced. They had prepared for natural threats, storms, shortages, even potential sabotage. But they hadn't expected an armed enemy so soon. "I don't know," Derek said, his eyes scanning the readings. "I'm trying to get a visual, but their ship is still too far to make out. However, I've detected multiple energy signatures. They might be armed." Alina's heart sank. Prepare for the worst. Alert the crew. We need to be ready for anything. Within minutes, the stalwart Horizon crew was on high alert. The Urian survivors, who had no experience with combat or defense, were quickly ushered to safe shelters. Alina knew the raiders, or whatever they were, would likely target the weakest first. They couldn't afford to make any mistakes. The strange ship drew closer, and Alina could feel the tension in the air. She watched through the viewing window as the vessel, a sleek, dark ship, loomed on the horizon. Its design was unfamiliar, something she had never seen in any database or star charts. The ship seemed almost too advanced, like it had been built for stealth, with no clear markings or insignia. "Any communication?" Elena asked Derek. "I'm trying, Captain." "They're not responding to hails," Derek said, his tone growing more worried. "We've attempted multiple channels, but they're either ignoring us or blocking the signals entirely." "Great," Elena muttered. "Prepare for a possible attack. Get the defense systems online and make sure everyone stays inside. If things go south, we'll need to move quickly." The crew worked quickly, setting up makeshift barricades and getting their weapons ready. Elena's mind was racing. She hadn't expected the Urians' first real test to come this soon. Their resources were still limited, and their defensive capabilities were practically non-existent. How could they fight an enemy they knew nothing about? The ship came closer, and then, in a sudden burst of speed, it appeared directly above the settlement, hovering ominously. Elena's stomach twisted. She knew this wasn't just a random encounter. These invaders had come for a reason. And then the ship spoke. A loud, grating voice echoed through the settlement's communication systems, sending shivers down Elena's spine. "This is the Ashera Dominion," the voice said, cold and commanding. "You have no right to interfere with the Urian. Stand down or face the consequences." Elena's hands tightened into fists. The Ashera Dominion. She had heard rumors of them. Raiders, pirates, mercenaries, known for their ruthlessness and brutal tactics. They didn't care who they harmed or how many innocent lives they destroyed in their pursuit of power. If they had come for the Urian, it could only mean one thing. They had seen the planet's vulnerability and were ready to exploit it. "We're not backing down," Elena replied, her voice steady despite the fear she felt. "We're here to protect the Urian, and we'll do whatever it takes to ensure they're safe." The voice on the other end of the communication chuckled darkly. "You think you can protect them? You're nothing more than a handful of humans and a broken ship. You're out of your league, Captain. This planet is ours now. Leave, or we will show you the true power of the Ashera Dominion." Elena's heart raced. She couldn't just leave. Not when they had made a promise to the Urian. Not when humanity had taken the first steps toward building something greater. But at the same time, she knew the stalwart Horizon was no match for a full-scale assault. The crew had no military training, no warships to defend themselves with. The situation was dire. "We'll stand our ground," Elena said firmly, her voice resolute. "But we'll do it on our terms. We'll fight, but we'll make sure the Urian remains safe. You'll have to go through us." The voice on the other end was silent for a long moment. When it spoke again, there was a different tone, a chilling sense of finality. "Very well, Captain," the voice said coldly. "We will take the planet by force if necessary. But know this, you are already outmatched." With that, the transmission was cut off, leaving a deep, unsettling silence in its wake. Elena looked around at her crew, their faces grim, knowing that a battle was coming. They were far from ready, but there was no turning back now. The Urian had been abandoned by the galaxy for too long. Now, humanity would not allow them to fall without a fight. Elena felt the weight of their responsibility more than ever. This was no longer just about saving the people. It was about standing up to an enemy that would stop at nothing to claim what didn't belong to them. As the Ashera Dominion ship hovered overhead, Elena knew that the real test of their courage and resolve had just begun. The fight for the future of the Urian and humanity was about to begin. The moment the Ashera Dominion ship cut off communication, the tension in the air grew thick. Elena stood firm, her heart pounding in her chest as she watched the dark silhouette of the enemy ship hover above the settlement. The crew scrambled to prepare, setting up defensive positions around the camp, while the Urian survivors watched with fearful eyes. Elena's mind raced. They had no warships, no advanced weaponry, nothing that could match the Ashera Dominion's technological superiority. Yet, she refused to give in. Humanity wasn't known for its strength in numbers, but for its resilience, ingenuity, and determination. These were the qualities that had helped them survive on countless worlds, and they would be the same qualities that would help them fight for the Urian. "We need to buy some time," Alina said, turning to Derek, who had just finished checking the weapon systems. "Can you get our defenses up to full strength?" Derek nodded quickly. "It'll take a few minutes, but I can activate the energy shields around the perimeter. It won't hold for long, but it should give us a bit of an edge." "Good," Alina replied. "Get started. I'll coordinate with the crew." As Derek moved to activate the shields, Alina turned to the rest of the crew. "We can't defeat them with force alone. We have to be smart. Use the terrain. Set traps. Do whatever it takes to keep the Urians safe." The crew nodded, already moving to their positions. Alina could see the fear in their eyes, but there was also determination. They weren't just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for the future of an entire species. Meanwhile, Lyris, the elderly Urian leader, approached Alina. Her face was drawn with worry, but she held her head high. "What will you do?" Lyris asked, her voice trembling slightly. "They are too strong. I don't want anyone to die for us." "No one will die," Alina promised. "We're not going to let them take you." Lyris looked at her, a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty in her eyes. "You've already done so much for us, but I fear that the Ashera Dominion will not be easily deterred. They will destroy everything we've built." "We won't let them," Alina said firmly, her voice carrying the weight of a promise. "We'll fight, and we'll win." With that, the two parted ways, and Alina took her position near the front of the settlement, where she could keep an eye on the enemy ship. The energy shields were now in place, and the crew was ready to engage. Every moment felt like an eternity. Suddenly, the Ashera Dominion ship opened fire. A bright flash of light exploded in the distance, sending a shockwave through the ground. Alina's heart skipped a beat as she saw the first blast hit one of the nearby energy barriers. The shield held for a few seconds, but then crackled and faded under the immense force of the attack. Another blast followed, and the barrier collapsed entirely. "Shields are down," Derek shouted. "They're too powerful. Get ready for the next phase," Alina called out. "We have to hold them off until reinforcements arrive." The crew quickly fell back to their secondary positions, where they had set up makeshift traps. It was a desperate tactic, but it was all they had. Alina could see the Ashera Dominion ship circling overhead, preparing for another strike. It was clear that the enemy wanted to overwhelm them, to break their spirits before they had a chance to retaliate. But the crew wasn't about to give up. They had been pushed to the edge before, but they always found a way to keep going. "Prepare to fire," Alina shouted as she took her own position behind a barricade. She had a weapon now, a laser rifle. Nothing compared to the weapons the Dominion had, but it was better than nothing. With a deep breath, Alina fired. The shot wasn't perfect, but it was enough to get the attention of the enemy ship. A second later, the ship's guns opened fire again, but this time the crew was ready. They had set up a series of decoys and smoke screens, causing the Dominion's blasts to miss their mark. "Good job," Alina called, her voice filled with pride. The crew had responded quickly, working together to stay one step ahead of their enemy. But just as the crew began to feel a small sense of hope, a loud crash shook the ground. Alina's heart raced as she saw what had happened. Several of the enemy's assault drones had landed nearby, their mechanical legs scraping the earth as they advanced toward the settlement. The drones were heavily armed, and their firepower was devastating. The crew's makeshift defenses wouldn't be enough to stop them. "Get to the perimeter," Alina ordered. "We need to hold them back." The crew raced into position, firing at the advancing drones. Alina aimed carefully, her hands steady despite the fear in her heart. The drones were relentless, but so were they. Every shot that hit a drone was a small victory, but there were too many of them, and they kept coming. Derek's voice came through the comms. "I've got reinforcements on the way, but they won't be here for another hour." Then we hold the line for an hour. Elena shouted, her voice fierce. We don't give up. The crew pushed forward, taking out drones one by one. It was exhausting, and the drones' attacks were wearing them down. But they had no choice. They couldn't afford to fail, not when the future of the Urian depended on their survival. As the battle raged on, Elena felt a surge of determination. She wasn't just fighting for her crew. She was fighting for the hope that humanity could stand tall in the face of adversity. For the belief that even when the odds seemed impossible, they could always find a way to overcome. And no matter what, she knew they would never back down. The battle raged on. Elena's heart raced as she watched the Ashera Dominion's drones advancing relentlessly. The crew fought bravely, but there was no denying the odds. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and time was running out. The reinforcements that Derek had mentioned still hadn't arrived, and the few traps they had set up were no longer enough to hold back the powerful assault. Keep firing. Don't let them through. Elena shouted, her voice strained but determined. The crew didn't hesitate. Every one of them stood tall, despite the overwhelming pressure. Derek's voice crackled over the comms. We're running low on ammo. If those drones get any closer, we won't be able to hold them off. Elena's mind raced. There had to be something they could do. The enemy's firepower was overwhelming, but they weren't fighting with their full strength. She had seen the Ashera Dominion ships before. There was something they weren't using. Something that could make all the difference. Elena, watch out. Derek's shout snapped her out of her thoughts. She ducked just as a blast from one of the drones narrowly missed her. The force of the blast left a deep scar in the ground where she had been standing only a moment before. Her heart thudded in her chest. She couldn't afford to get careless now. Not when everything was on the line. Everyone, fall back to the central base, Elena ordered, her voice sharp. It was time for a new strategy. They couldn't keep fighting on the front lines like this, not without a plan. The central base was well guarded and had a few more resources that could help them turn the tide of battle. As they fell back, Elena's mind worked furiously. She needed to find a way to neutralize the Dominion's firepower, and fast. That's when it hit her. The enemy ship wasn't firing at full capacity. They had been focused on the ground forces, leaving their ship vulnerable to a more direct attack. There's a chance, Elena muttered to herself. She turned to Derek. I need you to set up a direct line to the Dominion ship's engines. Can you hack into their system? Derek nodded without hesitation. I'll try. But I need a clear shot. Their ship's shield is tough. Don't worry, Elena said with a fierce smile. We'll make one. The crew moved quickly, setting up their position in a secluded corner near the central base. From here, they could get a better view of the Dominion ship overhead. Elena and Derek quickly devised a plan to create a distraction, giving Derek the opportunity he needed to infiltrate the enemy ship systems. Get ready, Elena shouted to the crew. We'll only get one shot at this. The crew took their places, positioning themselves in the best spots for a surprise attack. Elena could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a battle for everything the Urian people had worked so hard to protect. If they lost, the Dominion would wipe them out, and humanity's mission would have failed. With everything in place, Elena gave the signal. The crew opened fire, focusing their shots on the enemy's drones. The Dominion, expecting a retreat, was caught off guard by the sudden counterattack. As the drones fired back, the crew used the smoke from the blasts to hide their movements, moving closer to the central base. Derek, you're up, Elena called. Derek quickly took his position and connected a portable device to the communication array. He was ready to hack into the Dominion ship systems, but he needed time. Elena, I need at least 5 minutes to get into their systems, Derek said, his voice tight with concentration. Can you keep them distracted? 5 minutes. Elena didn't have much time. She nodded firmly. I'll do what I can, she said, raising her weapon. We're not giving up now. The crew pressed on, determined not to let the Ashera Dominion get any closer. Each blast from the drones felt like a personal challenge. The odds were stacked against them, but they fought with every ounce of their strength. As the seconds ticked by, Alina found herself caught in the heat of the battle. She had never imagined that things would come to this. She had never imagined she'd be leading a fight like this, on a strange world with alien allies, fighting for survival against an overwhelming enemy. But here she was, doing what humanity did best, never backing down. Then, Derek's voice came over the comms again, his voice full of hope. "I've broken through. The ship's engine systems are exposed. I can cause a chain reaction if you can get a direct shot at the core." "Alina." Derek called again. "It's now or never." There was no hesitation. Alina turned toward the Dominion ship, already raising her weapon. She took a deep breath and aimed for the heart of the enemy ship. The crew followed her lead, each of them targeting the vulnerable systems Derek had uncovered. As Alina fired, she felt a surge of hope. The blast hit its mark, sending a shockwave through the air. The Dominion ship wobbled in the sky. The crew watched, their breath held, as the ship began to tilt, its shields flickering. It was working. They had done it. But the battle wasn't over yet. The Dominion would send reinforcements, and they would have to keep fighting. Still, for the first time since the battle had begun, Alina felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, humanity and the Urian could survive this. The ground trembled as the HFY Dominion ship crashed to the surface, its engines now a smoldering wreck. The crew held their breath, watching the ship break apart in the distance. But even with the ship destroyed, the war was far from over. The Dominion was vast, and they would retaliate. Yet, for the first time in a long while, there was a sense of victory. Alina stood tall, her pulse racing with adrenaline. She could hear the cheers of her crew behind her, but she didn't let herself celebrate just yet. The battle might have been won, but the war was still looming. The HFY Dominion might be powerful, but they had seen the strength of humanity and the resolve of the Urian people. That knowledge was their weapon now. "Is everyone okay?" Alina asked, looking at the faces of her crew. They had endured so much, but the fight wasn't over yet. Derek stepped forward, his expression tired but determined. "We held them off for now, but we have to move quickly. The Dominion will send reinforcements. We need to be ready." Alina nodded, her mind already racing with plans. "We've got to reinforce our defenses. We can't afford to be caught off guard again." The crew quickly went to work, setting up barricades and communication lines. Alina couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The Dominion would retaliate soon, and they had to be prepared for anything. Then, as if on cue, a message came through on the comms. "This is Captain Erin of the Galactic Peace Force. We've arrived to assist you." Alina's heart skipped a beat. She had been hoping for reinforcements, but hearing those words filled her with relief. It was a sign that they were not alone, that others believed in their fight. "Captain Erin, thank you for coming." Alina responded, her voice full of gratitude. "We've managed to hold the line for now, but we need all the help we can get." "We're here to help," Captain Erin said. "We've also brought a fleet of ships to assist in the defense of the planet. The HFY Dominion won't know what hit them." Alina smiled, a spark of hope flickering in her chest. With the Galactic Peace Force on their side, they had a real chance of winning this fight. But she knew it wouldn't be easy. The Dominion was relentless, and they would not back down without a fight. "We'll need to coordinate our efforts," Alina said, glancing at her crew. "We've seen firsthand what the Dominion is capable of. We can't afford any mistakes." Captain Erin agreed. "We've already begun coordinating with local forces. We'll launch a full-scale assault on the Dominion fleet, but we'll need your team to continue leading the ground forces. You know this planet better than anyone." Alina nodded. "Understood. We'll do our part." With the Peace Force on their side, the momentum began to shift. The battle that had once seemed hopeless now felt winnable. But Alina knew that they couldn't take their victory for granted. They had to stay focused and keep pushing forward. The Dominion would not go down easily. The next few days were filled with intense planning and strategy. The combined forces of humanity, the Urian, and the Galactic Peace Force came together to launch a counteroffensive. The Dominion, although stunned by the loss of their ship, began regrouping. But the Allies had something the Dominion didn't: the strength of unity. Belina and her crew led the charge on the front lines, their resolve unshakable. The terrain was tough, the odds still against them, but the morale was higher than it had ever been. The Dominion might have underestimated humanity, but now they were about to see the full force of what they were up against. As the battle raged on, Belina couldn't help but think of everything that had brought them to this moment. The countless hours of planning, the lives lost, and the sacrifices made. But more than that, it was the unity between the species that had made the difference. The Urian, the humans, and the Galactic Peace Force had become one, fighting together for a cause that was bigger than any one of them. And as the final Dominion ships were taken down, the air was filled with cheers. The battle was over. The war was won. Elena stood on the battlefield, looking out at the wreckage of the Dominion fleet. The planet was safe, for now. But this victory was not just about the fight. It was about something much larger. It was about hope. In that moment, Elena realized that this battle was just the beginning. They had shown the universe that humanity wasn't a force to be ignored. They had proven that, when united with their allies, they could stand up to any threat. The Ashera Dominion might have been powerful, but humanity had something they could never understand: resilience, ingenuity, and an unbreakable will to protect those they loved. As the sun began to rise over the battlefield, Elena smiled. This was just the dawn of a new era, one where humanity would rise to meet any challenge that came their way, standing side by side with their allies to create a better future for all. And with that, she knew the galaxy would never turn away from them again.